That sound means we're live, right?
That's what I think it means.
Well, Scotty's muted.
All right. This is not going well so far, so I guess I'll jump in until Scotty joins us. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Carolina Weather Group. I'm not Scotty Powell. Ricky Matthews in the Tri-Cities area. Filling in for Scotty momentarily. We have a pretty cool show planned for you tonight. We're going to have Jason Samal, who I probably just messed up his name, joining us from the Capital Weather Gang up in the DC area. You probably have seen some of their blog posts from over the years and some of their posts on Facebook, and really some of their posts that kind of dive into a little bit of some getting behind the details of weather to responsible weather journalism and snowstorms and all different types of things that happen, not only in the DC area, but also all across the United States, really. So appropriate that we have Jason joining us tonight as we potentially start to deal with snow here in parts of the Carolinas, which we're going to do a special show here in about an hour or so. If you're joining us for this one, stay tuned for that one coming up. We'll have a new link in just a little bit. But since we have a few minutes, we will give it to James, who has been gone for quite a while. It's nice to see you again, buddy.
It's good to see you too. Happy New Year. Yeah, I haven't been here since last year. Well, actually, about a month and a half, it feels like. So it's good to be back on. Welcome into my very messy new office here, where you can see we still have boxes full of overflowing stuff. So still in South Charlotte. I'm in the Rain Tree community now near the Arboretum. I would say roughly about 6 o'clock on the 485 loop of Charlotte. So a slight move down the road from Pineville. But it's good to be back on with you, and it's good to be living in a place that has running water, which is a whole nother story that could probably be its own podcast. But it was a gorgeous day here in South Charlotte across, I think, most of the metro area. Had the windows open this afternoon. Ricky, I got mouthed a wow there. That's right. So I think we kind of just crossed that 60-degree mark, if I'm not mistaken. And so with a nice sweatshirt on, it was a good excuse to open the windows, clear out that air in the townhouse here, get some fresh air in. We're at 51 at this hour, by the way, a number that I think we'll all be wishing we still had by the time we get into this weekend, because it's going to be bone-chilling cold, whether it snows 6 feet, 6 inches, or 6 centimeters. It's going to be cold.
All right, so we got to go back for a second. Now, let me ask you, is it more important to have Wi-Fi or running water?
Why is it an or?
I mean, I think some people have a preference.
So I'm going to say running water because, and if this isn't getting around the rules of this contest, I have an unlimited 4G Verizon cell phone plan with a hotspot. And I set a new record with all the traveling I've been doing and everything I've been doing. 45 gigs and counting this month.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yes. So I'll take running water because I think I got the Wi-Fi covered.
All righty. Let's go to Shay, who's down in Charleston, to kind of see what's happening in his neck of the woods. And then if we have our guest, who I think we do, is just joining us, we'll bring him in here in just 1 second.
Thanks, Ricky. Yeah, we've had, I'll tell you, Charleston, we were 81 degrees 2 days ago on Monday. Record breaker from 1952 at 79 degrees. We broke it by 2 degrees. And that very night, our low temperatures or high lows were 63, 64, which beat the old high low temperature of like 57 or 58. So, we go from record breaking warmth and a nice cruise downhill into this weekend with the possibility of some wintry weather making it close to the coast. I'm not entirely certain that we're going to see anything here. We may see a few flurries late in the afternoon to evening Saturday, but it looks like a lot of that moisture and that warmer air off the ocean is going to be kind of mixing in along the coastline. Just really depends on how close the low pressure comes. If the closer the coastline it is, the more chance of rain and warm air. Whereas the further removed from the coast, the chance that the Arctic air could push down to the coastline and actually give us a little chance. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But for right now, the weather is fairly pleasant, fairly mild, low 60s. A few clouds, a few stratus decks overhead, some cirrus. Nothing that crazy. A little bit of a westerly zonal flow going through the air as far as winds go. And pretty much expecting the same thing tomorrow, maybe some moderate low to mid-teens across the open areas of the Charleston Harbor. And that's about it for Charleston right now. Back to you, Ricky.
All righty. I mean, rare just in the instance that you guys are even talking about any winter weather in your neck of the woods. We'll dive into that around 9 o'clock or so. Now, getting to someone who probably sees a little more snow than most of us, although with Scotty and I, perhaps an exception with the mountains coming into play. Jason, welcome to our show.
It's a pleasure. Can you guys hear me okay?
We have you perfectly. And,
great, excellent.
So tell us a little bit about the Capital Weather Gang, that the organization you're with, just a little bit of background information for people who perhaps aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, sure. So Capital Weather Gang is the Washington Post weather team, and we started off as an independent website. Back in 2003 to 2004, I started a site called capitalweather.com, which became a blog for DC area weather. And originally it was just me, but I added contributors over time. And through the course of years, we grew our following and got some media attention from some of the local publications up here in the DC area. We got other blogs to link to us. And Washington Post around 2007 noticed what we were doing, liked what we were doing, and asked us to become part of their organization. And so we moved our blog, capitalweather.com, over to washingtonpost.com and became the Capital Weather Gang. And we launched with them in January 2008. So we've been part of the Post now almost 9 years. We initially started off, I worked for the Post on a contract basis for about 3 years. I had another day job working for the government on climate change issues. And we, in 2010, our contract was up and the Post decided to hire me full-time, brought me into the newsroom as the Post weather editor and also the chief meteorologist for the Capital Weather Gang. So anyways, just a little bit more about us. So it's not just me, it's a whole group of us. I work with Angela Fritz, who's deputy weather editor. Angela came from Weather Underground and also worked for CNN for a period of time. And she, so she and I work together very closely. We're the two full-time Washington Post employees who are part of the Weather Gang. And then we've got a team of contributors who are freelancers. They have other day jobs or they're retired in some cases. We've got like Wes Junker, who's our winter weather expert, and we've got about 10 or 15 freelance contributors. As you all know, the weather doesn't turn off. We cover the weather, not just U.S. weather. Not just D.C. weather. Obviously, that's our focus. We provide really in-depth D.C. weather coverage, but we also cover national weather stories, international weather stories, and weather-adjacent issues like climate change and space weather, astronomy, things like that. So it's a broad mix. We put out a lot of content. We do 2 forecast updates a day for the DC area and then probably about 5 additional blog posts on an array of topics, as I said, from national weather to international weather to other topics. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We put a real emphasis on engagement, on reader engagement. We're on social media, Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, and our blog is very active. We get dozens of comments a day on our blog. We also put a real emphasis on communicating uncertainty because in the DC area, we're often near that range to the line. So, obviously we like to, when we have complex events, to present different scenarios so people understand the range of different outcomes. And we've done that from the beginning. We've always sort of communicated our forecast confidence, tried to be transparent. When we bust a forecast, we try to be accountable, explain what we got right, what we got wrong, and so forth. So that's kind of your elevator story, maybe a little bit longer than an elevator ride, but that's sort of a background about the Capital Weather Gang. We've got, obviously a big audience here in the DC area. We've got a large Twitter following. I think we just crossed 700,000 followers today, so which is pretty cool. So yeah, that's basically it. It's a pleasure to join you guys tonight.
And so with you guys being an entity of the Washington Post, how much on a day-to-day basis does your information get, I guess, disseminated with others who work for the Washington Post? Do you guys have like a meeting where you're in each day and you kind of discuss some things that are going on weather-wise across the nation that they may be interested in?
Sometimes when we have big weather events, we'll coordinate with the rest of the newsroom. And obviously, Washington Post has a large team of national reporters. And when there are big weather events, we want to make sure that people are positioned in the right place to be on the ground to cover those. For example, during Hurricane Matthew, we were in close coordination with the newsroom about where we were dispatching reporters in Florida up through Eastern North Carolina. So yeah, we do coordinate with them. It's not every day. It's when there are big storms when we do a lot of our coordination and interaction. But we do work with a lot of different sections in the paper, from graphics to social media to video. The Post has a growing video department, so we do a lot of Facebook Lives when there are significant events, and we'll do sort of short 1-minute weather explainers when we have a significant weather event coming in. We're producing content across platforms and working throughout the newsroom.
And I think that's a remarkable thing about the Capital Weather Gang. I don't think a week or 2 weeks goes by that I don't see an article from you guys. It kind of spreads like wildfire throughout the weather community, just because you guys get really in depth on some topics and comment on some engaging and sometimes controversial topics as well,
Yep.
to draw engagement and to spark some conversation as well. Why do you think that's important? Why do you think that's some of the things that you guys want to write about?
Well, part of our job is to entertain and attract eyeballs. Now, it's not about clickbait. It's about sort of exploring contemporary topics which are resonating in the weather community that matter, but that may draw a range of opinions. And so, for example, when you have folks putting out 7 to 10 day snowfall accumulation maps. And that's sort of what everyone's talking about, we'll write about it. Or, after the Louisiana floods, the fact that the media coverage was so weak, we explored, well, why wasn't that event better covered? What were the factors that led to the Louisiana flood basically being ignored when it was the worst flooding event the nation had seen since basically Katrina at the time. So, any sort of contemporary weather topics which we see sort of percolating on social media, which are generating a lot of different viewpoints. We try to provide a voice. Sometimes people will agree with us. They don't have to. That's okay. But what we want to do is generate a discussion. We want to be fair. And if we present an opinion which isn't popular or there's an alternative point of view, we encourage folks to provide that. And we frequently will post guest columns from other folks who aren't affiliated with us. So, at the end of the day, we always try to be fair, and we always try to pick topics which we think are going to resonate with the community.
So you mentioned posting snow maps, quite a while ahead of time, 7 to 10 days out, which we run into about every month down here, maybe every week or every day in the wintertime in the Southeast. Talk a little bit from your point of view, and this can be totally your opinion, not the Capital Weather Gang, but what's responsible weather posting in your mindset? Let's say we're expecting a snowstorm next Tuesday. What should you be doing in each of the 5 days, 7 days leading up to that system?
Yeah, sure. So the way we handle it is we will do long range outlooks. I mean, we do outlooks up to 2 weeks in advance. And what we try to do is we try to express it, what are the snow chances compared to climatology? Is the pattern more favorable for snow than normal or less favorable for snow than normal? And that's how we typically start off when we're about 2 weeks out. In fact, I think it was around this time last week when we started to talk about the fact that the pattern late this week would be a good one for snow, although not perfect. So Wes Junker, who's our winter weather expert, he was looking at the upper flow and the teleconnections and so forth. And there's a pretty strong signal that we're going to have a cold air in place, and that there would be an Arctic front stalling somewhere around the Mid-Atlantic or the South, and that it would be a favorable pattern for waves to develop and potentially bring snow. And so that's how we initially characterize the threat or the risk, was just that the pattern was somewhat better than normal for snow, and that it was the best pattern we had so far this winter season. And then I think once you're within about a week, you can start to talk a little bit about, first you talk about the patterns, the overall pattern, then you can start to talk about specific weather systems or waves. Now, every pattern's different, and some patterns are more predictable than others. And so I guess it was around last Friday, we started to talk about, okay, there's some waves of low pressure which might form along this front, but the models are having a difficult time figuring out, which short wave to key on. And so in terms of the timing of any snow or mixed precipitation, that was still up in the air. And so you start to maybe at about a week out or so, depending on the pattern, you can start to lay out different scenarios. And so we developed up 4 different scenarios last Friday. So again, just to back up, 2 weeks in advance, you can talk about the pattern, maybe a week in advance. Well, 10 to 14 days, you can talk about the pattern generally. Then maybe 7 to 10 days out, you can start to lay out some scenarios. And then you can't really start to talk about specifics and narrowing down the scenarios until within about 3 to 5 days. And that's where we were at the beginning of the week. And then, now that we're within about 48 hours of at least the first snow event that we're looking at here in the DC area Thursday night, we can start to talk about specifics today. We start to talk about accumulations and timing and things like that. And then tomorrow we'll really try to nail it down. So, that's ballpark. As I said, every pattern is different. Some patterns have more spread in the ensembles than others. Some, the ensemble members will be more tightly clustered. And so the short waves and the long waves will be in better agreement across model simulations, and so you'll have a little bit better predictability. So if we look back at the January 22-23 snowstorm last year, the blizzard, 2016, or as we called it here in the DC area, Snowzilla, that event showed up very well on models and ensembles about 6 days in advance. And I think, within 5 days or even 4 days, we were talking about a severe snowstorm possibility in the DC area. That doesn't happen often, but sometimes with the really big storms, you can see that. Anyway, so to get back to your original question, though, sort of about, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. I think, deterministic, when you're seeing deterministic forecasts at lead times, when you can really only be talking about the pattern or ensembles, that's when you can get into trouble. And I think hobbyists, some hobbyists, and I don't want to demonize hobbyists, because there's some hobbyists who are as good at forecasters as professional meteorologists, and who understand the limits of forecasting as well as professional meteorologists. And professional meteorologists I see posting deterministic snow maps too. So, I think we have to be accountable as well, as professionals, not to get ahead of ourselves by putting stuff out there which really isn't responsible. So I don't want to say it's just a problem among hobbyists, but the point is that whether you're talking about hobbyists or professional meteorologists, we have to be cognizant of the limits of predictability, and we have to know that when we put out deterministic products at lead times, when those products don't have a lot of skill, they can be misleading to the public. They can actually do a disservice, because what ends up happening is, if these snow maps get shared and go viral, they can get into the hands of emergency managers, and they can get into the hands of important decision makers, and they see these maps, and then they start asking the Weather Service what's going on in the weather, and then it becomes a distraction. The Weather Service then has to take time out and explain, this is not really true. So the damage control, which is involved when these irresponsible products are put out there, there are some consequences to that. So I think we have to be aware of that.
So when it comes to disseminating information in the long term, are there any words we should use, words we should avoid, stuff like that when we're posting about the potential for a snowstorm in that 7 to 10 day range?
Yeah, I'm not, I don't pretend to be the authority. I think we're all learning by doing. And I think, there have probably been times when we've erred in how we, express uncertain information. And, this is all kind of new territory, because, models are getting better and better. We have more tools available to us. But, I think, I think you just have to include the qualifiers, and you have to, and I think it's really important to sustain that commitment to communicating to your audience what the limits of predictability are. But, there is this demand. Folks want to know with more and more lead time when the pattern for snow, or whether it's snow, or whether it's a tropical cyclone, when the setup might be conducive to something. So since there's a demand for that information, people are going to try to provide that. But I think you just want to be honest and transparent with people. You want to include the necessary qualifiers, and you don't want to get ahead of yourself, and you don't want to put out a product which has little value just to get clicks. And I think there's an education process involved here that we all need to as a community, as a meteorology community, whether we're hobbyists or whether we're professionals, we have to all together be educating our consumers as to what information is credible and what's not.
Hey, Jason, I'm James. Thanks for coming on tonight. One of
Hey,
the
you bet.
reasons I really like reading what you guys put out is because I feel like I can get a really good scientific explanation about what's happening, but in a way that's really understandable. So I was wondering if you could take us inside that editorial process. How do you write for your audience? Who is your audience, and how do you reach such a broad scope in a way that's so understandable?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So what we try to do is we try to layer our content, and so when we do a sort of an in-depth blog post, we'll start off and try to sort of in plain English, no jargon, in a way everyone can understand. Sort of lay out what the key points are at the very beginning. You know, a mistake I see frequently in weather writing is people do what we call bury the lead. That is, you know, the lead is the most important information: the who, what, where, why, and when. And sometimes people, they make you read a bunch of technical information before you get the bottom line. We start off with the bottom line. You know, what is it that people need to know in plain English? If they're qualifiers, we have to provide, because we're doing a long range forecast, we'll put those at the top. And then, you know, deeper down in the story, we'll get into our more technical discussion. But even in our technical discussions, you know, I try to, I mean, and, you know, when you're discussing weather models, there are a lot of acronyms, but yeah, I try to, without dumbing it down, you know, we just try to make it accessible to folks. So even if they're not like a weather junkie, they can get a sense of what we're trying to communicate. You know, so maybe rather than low heights of 500 millibars, we'll say, you know, there's a cold pool at high altitudes, or something like that. That's an example. So, you know, there are ways of communicating sort of what the models are telling you without sort of using meteorological terms that are going to confuse people. Like, a lot of people don't know what a trough is, you know, so we'll say, you know, a dip in the jet stream, you know, in which cold air plunges south or something like that. You know, you sort of add on a little bit of plain English when you do use a term that the general reader may not be aware of. And, you know, I always tell my writers, you know, pretend, you know, if they're a meteorologist, pretend your mother or your dad who has no scientific background, or an uncle who has no scientific background, is reading this, or someone you meet on the train on the way to work is reading this. Are they going to be able to understand it? And if the answer is no, then, you know, you need to try to, you know, add a little bit more context, and and I also encourage our writers to use analogies and metaphors to help people understand complex science and scientific ideas. But, you know, it's I'm not quite saying we're perfect, you know, but we're always trying to make our stuff more accessible, because obviously we have a committed weather junkie readership, and, you know, they like the technical stuff. So we want to provide information that they're going to enjoy and consume, but at the same time, because we're part of the Post, and our stuff will get linked from, you know, WashingtonPost.com from the homepage, and, you know, people with absolutely no scientific background may click on our piece. We don't want to turn them off. We don't want them to read our stuff and think, oh my gosh, what is this? This isn't useful to me. So we always, at least at the very beginning, a lot of people aren't going to read that far down anyways, but you want your information at the top to have your take-home message. And hopefully you hook those people at the top, and then they're try to read deeper down and get into it a little bit. And you want to make sure when they get into it a little bit, they're not being overwhelmed, and you're giving them clues so that they can understand what you're talking about.
Jason Shea here with Wind Alert. Question for you. Yeah, as a blog writer, I don't do a whole lot of articles to your degree, but one thing that gets me sometimes is, what are you going to put for the headline? And that always is something that jumps right out. That's a huge piece, and sometimes I have to sit back and scratch my head and say, really, what do I want to put on here that's not going to sound like clickbait? It's going to get to the point, and it's going to be probably the most important piece to get people to read that blog or your article. In your instance, what kind of thought goes into what you do for headlining? Yeah,
headline might be the most important part of your whole story, because if people can't get past the headline, they're not going to read. They're not going to click on your story. So you have to hook them right there. You know, a lot of people will, you know, 90% of people coming to WashingtonPost.com might see your headline, but then maybe only a third will actually click on the story. So, I mean, obviously you want that percentage to be higher. You want to, you know, if you want more than half the people who see your headlines to click on it. hopefully, if not everybody. So yeah, I mean, you have to strike the right balance with a headline. It has to be engaging, it has to be compelling. Otherwise, people aren't going to click. But on the other hand, you don't want it to be clickbait. And clickbait is the way I define clickbait is it's a headline in which you don't deliver on the promise. So an example would be clickbait, one which I actually sort of wrote a rant about last year. Was the Weather Channel wrote for like a really mild nor'easter hitting New England, like millions threatened, and like it was like a 998 low, hitting New England with 20-mile-per-hour winds and maybe half an inch of rain, and the headline was millions threatened, and so that's clickbait, because that's the millions weren't being threatened, and so the story wasn't delivering on the promise. So you can easily with a headline, you want to hit the sweet spot, right? You want it to be compelling, you want it to be engaging, maybe provocative, but you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. You don't want to overhype something. So, finding that sweet spot can be challenging, and sometimes you won't hit it. Sometimes your headline will end up too boring and people won't click on it. Sometimes, maybe you get a little bit too excited about something and it's over the top, and then you lose credibility with your readers. They read the story and they're just like, what, this headline was too much based on, what you've just written. So yeah, you have to. It's always a struggle, but you have to work at it. And we at the Washington Post, we workshop headlines. So if it's an important story, we have actually a chat group within the Washington Post. I'll come up with 3 or 4 different headline possibilities. I'll post them in the chat group, and I'll ask folks which one they like best, and then if the people in our chat group like it, we'll go with the one they like best. But sometimes we'll revise, we'll iterate multiple times until we all come up with a headline we like. So workshopping headlines, you don't have to have a chat group of journalists to do it. You can just bounce it off a friend, a colleague, and see what they think, and they may have a better idea, so you can sharpen it and make it a little bit more compelling.
As long as you don't say, you won't believe this. You've never seen this ever.
That's right.
I think Ricky had a question for you.
Yep,
yeah, Jason, you guys write for both the Capitol Weather Gang, but as an entity of the Washington Post, you're also writing for them. So you have a couple different Facebook pages these articles are being posted on. Do you guys write any differently? The Facebook post, the text that goes with the links and stuff, for the Capitol Weather Gang post versus the post on the Washington Post page?
Yeah, so I mean, just to be clear, the Capitol Weather Gang Facebook account is part of the Washington Post. I mean, we have our own Facebook group that's part of the Washington Post. But yes, sometimes our stories, which we post on our Capitol Weather Gang page, will be shared by the Washington Post main account, which has over 1 million likes or something like that. So, but that's a decision we don't make. So, if we have a big story, I'll pitch it to our social media team to put on the Washington Post Facebook page, or to put on Washington Post Twitter, which has a huge following, obviously. And so then they make the decisions as to how to try to get people to click on our stories. But they're pretty good. I mean, they're professionals. They understand that the perils of clickbait. So they're not going to oversell your story. They're going to probably convey it the same way that we do. Because they realize that they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get in trouble with us, because if they don't accurately convey what's in our story, then we're going to go to them and say what's going on, and then they're going to have to fix it, and they'd rather not have to do that. But they're hardworking journalists and social media producers, and so they have a good sense as to in 9 out of 10 or 95% of the time how to share our stuff.
Okay, awesome. Let's go dive a little bit into some of the indices that you guys use, because that's a big thing that's kind of taken off in the world of social media. Everyone kind of wants to know, what's the snow meter, what's the snow index, stuff like that. And you guys have dabbled in that for a while now. On Twitter, you have correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, a snow index that you post in the kind of the days leading up to it, saying, here's the potential for some snow, whether it's rising or lowering. And then you guys also have closing indexes for the federal government and schools, I believe.
Yep. Yeah, all the above. Yeah. So Yeah, I think we are just we've always sort of been in the mindset that we want to provide tools and products that people find useful, which can sort of give them a sense as to how disruptive the weather is going to be and how the weather is going to affect their lives. And so, yeah, we have several products, sort of number-based products that we put out. We have a daily digit, which is just a subjective rating of the day's weather, a scale from 1 to 10. Put that out every day, and every forecaster on our team, produces that with his or her forecast, and it's embedded within their forecast. But we also push it out on Facebook and Twitter. And it's just a fun way to sort of give people a sense as to whether we think it's going to be a nice day or not. Obviously, 33 and rain might be a 1, but if it's on a nice May day, which is 75 with sunshine, that might be a 10. So that's and that also encourages engagement. So we're all about that. So we got the daily digit, and then we've got the snow potential index, which whenever we see at least a 10% probability of at least an inch of snow within a week in the DC area, at any of our 3 airports, BWI, Dulles, or National, we think there's a 10% chance of an inch. That's sort of the threshold. We launch the snow potential index, and then as that index rises and falls, we indicate the tendency with an up arrow or a down arrow or a sideways arrow if it's the same from one day to the next. And obviously, I think we're going to go we're looking at a little disturbance coming through the DC area tomorrow night, dusting to an inch, maybe 2 inches in the region. So we're probably going to go, we had it at 3 this morning, our snow potential index. I think tomorrow morning we're going to up that to about a 5 or a 6. The day of the event, and it's kind of I think it's about a 50-50 chance as to whether we'll get an inch in DC. But so that gives you a sort of a case example of how we use that particular index. And then let's see what else do we have. Yes, a Schoolcast. Yeah, Schoolcast is just a probabilistic forecast as to what we think the chance of school is in all the counties within a 2-county radius of DC when there's a winter weather event. And very popular product. Teachers, kids, parents love it. It gets us a lot of clicks, and it's not just about clicks. It's about trying to help people understand, what's going to happen with the schools. And I've been forecasting the DC area for about 20 years now, so I have a pretty good sense as to what schools are going to do in a given situation. Obviously, there's uncertainty there. That's why we give probabilities. So, but yeah, popular product, and we may have to do that. May have to issue a Schoolcast tomorrow night. Depending on on where the forecast goes for Thursday night in the DC area. And then we do the FedCast, which is the likelihood the federal government will remain open or closed, or issue sort of a unscheduled leave policy. So we do that as well. And then lastly, we just launched a new one today, a new product, big rollout. It's our Capital Weather Gang Winter Storm Impact Scale. And now this one's an interesting one. I kind of was thinking about this a couple of years ago. I was thinking, snowstorms in DC they're a lot more than just about the amount of snow. It's about the duration of the snow. It's about how cold the temperatures are before the snow begins, how cold the temperatures are while the snow is falling, and then how cold it is after the storm. It's about wind. It's about a whole bunch of other things. Like, it's about, okay, is the snow happening during the week or during the weekend? Is it happening during December and January when the sun angle is low, or is it happening in March when the sun angle is high? So there are a lot of different variables in DC which play into how significant a winter storm is going to be. So I thought, it'd be cool if we could come up with an index or to sort of better communicate what the impact of a storm is going to be. Because sometimes, you might have a 6 to 10 inch snowstorm which hits during the night over the weekend, doesn't have much of an impact, but you could have an inch during a weekday late afternoon, evening period during rush hour. You can have cars stranded for hours and gridlock in DC. So the idea behind this index was to try to give people a better sense as to the severity of winter storms in the DC area based on impact rather than just snow amount. So we launched that today. There are about, probably about 15, 20 variables that go into this, but it's just a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being a nuisance storm, 5 being a crippling to historic winter storm. And so far, the reaction's been great. We'll see if the storm coming through tomorrow night, gets categorized. When I ran the index today, it's actually a spreadsheet, and I've developed like a little spreadsheet model for this. It didn't quite make category 1 tomorrow night's event, but with some of the newer data coming in tonight, it's possible that by tomorrow morning it ekes out a category 1 rating. So we'll have to see how that goes.
From a social media standpoint, a social science standpoint, it's interesting stuff you guys are doing. You're gonna have to do an NWA presentation or something on that coming up in a few years once you get a little bit.
Yeah, we'll have to see that. Yeah, we need some cases under our belt and see how it plays out. I did, to develop it, I ran a bunch of test cases. I probably looked at about 20 historic cases and sort of ran it through the spreadsheet to see if I thought if it would produce a valid, legitimate number given how the storm impacted the area. And I think it worked pretty well in the historic cases, and we'll have to see how it works on cases moving forward. And it'll be interesting too, because historically, after snow events, we have done sort of post-mortem discussions as to how well we predicted the snow amounts in the region. But now we're going to have something else to sort of evaluate after each storm, which is, was our storm impact scale on spot for the region, or was it off? And if it was off, why? And so that's it's something else we'll have the opportunity to verify and try to validate and improve on over time.
Let's switch gears real quick, and then I think Shay has a question. We'll bring him in here, and I want to talk a little bit about how it always seems like winter weather is a much bigger, for lack of a better term, story than severe weather is. Why do you think that is? And do you guys see that in your engagement as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think winter weather just affects a lot more people in the DC area than severe will typically. I mean, severe is a mesoscale or microscale event. And so, the population affected by a thunderstorm is going to be much smaller than a snowstorm, which sort of covers the whole area. So I think it basically just comes down to population affected. And also, severe thunderstorm, the duration's also much shorter. Snowstorms last hours, days, and snow stays with us, unless you're talking about derecho, which takes down, tens of thousands of trees in the region. And, you can get extremely high impact thunderstorm outbreaks, but those are rather than, a several time a year event. It's like a once a decade type event, or even longer in the DC area where we'll get a widespread damaging thunderstorm outbreak. Thunderstorm outbreaks in the DC area are typically pretty localized. They're severe, and they obviously cause a lot of hardship for the communities they affect. Microbursts. We get this pretty frequently in the summer in the DC area, and you can get 70, 100 mile per hour winds over a very small location, but you can still see a lot of damage from those here. So yeah, I mean, thunderstorms are still a draw. I mean, obviously we see traffic spikes for thunderstorms, especially if there's a tornado watch, we're going to have a lot of readers. But snow is just kind of like, and because it's also because the DC are so vulnerable. We have a lot of southern transplant plants in the DC area, a lot of people who aren't experienced driving in snow. Snow happens, a few times a year, but it's irregular enough that each time it does happen in the DC area, it seems like it's always an adventure. Maybe after we have a really big winter, we have several high impact snowstorms. Maybe by the final snowstorm of the season, we're finally figuring out how to deal with it. But in most winters, they're spread out. People forget, if there's a snowstorm in December and then we don't have one until February, people, it's like they've never seen snow before by the time February rolls around. So it just doesn't happen enough that we're used to it and that we're acclimated to it. And it's, again, and I think you see this in the Mid-Atlantic, you just have a lot of people, who maybe grew up in different areas, and they're just not used to it. And so they kind of panic anytime it's in the forecast.
Jason, that's kind of segue into something I wanted to ask you about. And I see that you worked for the EPA for 10 years as a climate analyst. So, speaking of urban urban issues with development and climate, microclimate spreading out to massive scale and national and then global climate. You guys do quite a bit of work on climate change, and that was a hot potato, I feel, until the last couple of years when some of the real data started to start proving these points. How much time do you guys like to spend on that? Do you like to encourage your staff to spend a lot of time on climate change, or is that something you like to do personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think Angela and I both we both do the lion's share of the climate change writing for the blog, and climate change is a topic we write about when the weather's slower, when we don't have snowstorm approaching the DC area. It's obviously a topic I have some expertise on because I did work on it professionally for a decade. So I feel qualified to write about it. And it's something I keep my hands on the pulse on, and I track. And obviously I know a lot of climate scientists who I speak to, and so I try to stay current on the latest literature. And I think increasingly, we are seeing climate change manifest itself in our day-to-day weather. And so I think it's important to sort of provide that context, especially as we look at increasing warm weather extremes, decreasing cold extremes. We see our ratios of record highs to record lows increasingly disproportionate and things like that. So I think it's important to provide that context. Yeah, so in terms of how frequently we write about it, I would say we probably average 1 or 2 pieces a week related to climate change. But it just depends on what else is going on in the mix of available weather and climate stories that are in the news at a given time. And obviously the Post has other people writing about climate change, Chris Mooney and Brady Dennis, who's our environmental beat writer. So we're not the only folks who do it, but our niche in terms of climate change is sort of how climate change may or may not be impacting weather and extreme weather. And so we do try to look at that, and we also report a lot on climate trends, like how warm, how did December rank in terms of global temperature? How did December rank in terms of the U.S. average temperature? How are temperatures trending? How are precipitation trends changing and things like that? So that's how we look at it.
Alrighty, Scotty, you had a question you want to bring in?
Yeah. Is my mic working now?
Gotcha.
Okay. Jason, glad to finally meet you. I know we've been communicating via email. One thing that you wrote is kind of near and dear to our heart here in the Carolinas is the lack of radar coverage here in the Charlotte area. I know doing the article, you've kind of investigated on this stuff like that. Talk to us a little bit about what you put into that article and what you found out, maybe the progress that is currently taking place in legislation that may be providing a radar here in the Carolinas, maybe sometime now in the next 50 years.
Yeah, so I have to credit Brad Panovich. He kind of put the issue on my radar, so to speak. I know he was involved along with some other broadcast meteorologists in trying to convince local politicians to take this issue up, and I know there was some legislation introduced. To be honest, I need to touch base with them and find out where things are, because I think the last time I wrote about the article, there were some things being proposed, but I don't know if they ever sort of how far they got. So you guys may know more about the status of it than I do, because as I said, I need to kind of follow up with Brad and others and kind of find out where that is. So yeah, no, I think it's an important issue. Obviously, radar gaps, are a issue of societal importance, especially for you guys in North Carolina. But there are other parts of the country where there's some radar gaps, which ideally will be filled. And I know there's we did write about, and I wrote about, and Angela wrote about it, sort of a cross-cutting weather bill, which almost made it through Congress just before they adjourned in late December, and it passed the I think it passed the House and then got held up in the Senate because there was a disagreement about a provision that had implications for water resources in Florida and Georgia, and the senators down there were fighting over it. But so there was this comprehensive weather legislation which was going to improve provide resources, provide funding to improve seasonal forecasting, short-term forecasting, including hurricanes, severe weather, and included funding for improving forecast communication research. So it was sweeping legislation, which would have really kind of provided a lot of funding and resources across the weather enterprise to sort of move the ball forward, but it got held up. Now, from what I understand, it's going to be reintroduced in this next session. And I think folks are optimistic that it'll eventually get passed. What I don't know is whether the radar gap issue in North Carolina was put into that bill. So if that's part of the bill, then I'd be optimistic about the issue being addressed, but I'm not sure whether that specific piece made it into the sweeping legislation. Do you guys know?
I think it's still sitting on the desk. I don't think,
you think it's still sitting on. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you bring it up because I think it would be good for me to follow up on, and because we want to keep hammering at it. That's the only way you make progress. Sometimes is you can kind of you put it out there and it's ignored. You got to keep beating that drum, and hopefully eventually someone notices who has some influence and champions it.
Yeah, and just last month, I think it was early December, maybe the 7th or something like that. We had an EF1 tornado that went through the southwest part of Charlotte. So, radar there would have been a little bit more ideal to help warn those folks who were in the path of that. So thankfully, no injuries, just a little bit of damage. But definitely look forward to that opportunity of maybe getting some type of radar coverage here in the Piedmont of North Carolina. It really would help out.
You bet, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I know we're about 8:50. We're going to try to wrap up at 9. We have any follow-up questions for Jason before we kind of sign off for the night?
Nope, I think I'm good. We'll have to get Jason to go down to Capitol Hill and start picketing and putting some signs up and stuff for weather improvements, right?
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. I think one of the cool things about our blog is I get to report about the weather and I get to opine about the weather. I just have to be clear about when I'm, expressing my opinion and when I'm reporting, because you're sort of ethically as a journalist, that's you don't want to blur those lines. So we have sometimes been very proactive and provocative in the opinions we express, but at other times, we just have to be objective journalists and report what's happening and express both sides of an issue fairly. And we stress trying to be fair to all parties. But the fun part of running a blog, which can kind of be a combination of reporting and doing opinion, is that we can express different points of view, both our own and then by others. And as far as that goes, if you ever have a reaction to something you see on the Capitol Weather Gang or you think there's an alternative perspective we need to hear, I invite you guys to reach out to me. And if you can craft a well-written and coherent argument, we will consider it for publication. So we do invite guest perspectives, and so I'm easy to find. If you Google me, but my email is just jason.saminow@washpost.com, and you can tweet something to my attention or post something on Facebook. I'll probably see it there as well. And I encourage you all just to continue following our work. And I appreciate the invitation to be on the show today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Maybe we can get you back on some point later on this year and kind of talk about some of the new things that may be coming out. But Jason, give us the Twitter account there for the Capitol Weather.
Yeah, sure. So it's at Capitol Weather, and we also are on Facebook, facebook.com/Capitol Weather. And it's great fun. I'm glad I have been able to join you guys. I hope I can do so again. You all have a great community, well-respected community. You've had great guests, and really admire what you guys are doing down there. And you guys are having exciting next 72 hours. I was looking at the 18Z GFS and the European. I know you guys are having a special show, I believe, next to talk about that, right?
He says exciting. We say stressful.
Stressful.
Yeah, I think we've all aged about 5 or 10 years.
Well, you know where I think where the forecast is the toughest is a little bit north of you guys in like Southeast Virginia. Where's that snow going to cut off? Is Richmond going to get it? Are they cut off at the Hampton Roads? I'd hate to be a forecaster in Richmond for this one, or maybe around Williamsburg. It's gonna be
my hometown area is Hampton Roads. Where I grew up was in Hampton, and so we run into this almost every single snowstorm. It seems we either get lucky or we end up being right in that line. And I've been watching some of my friends at the TV stations there, just seeing what they're putting out. And I've seen anything between about 1 to 3 inches to 4 inches to about 10 inches in spots. So it's fun times, and I can see why they're putting all those different numbers out in each of the different.
It's a really tough one. I think as far as we're concerned here in DC, I think we're probably going to miss it. I mean, maybe our southern suburbs get fringe, but it's. I thought maybe yesterday that it was going to be we'd have a little bit of drama up here, and maybe we'd be on the edge. But the way things are trending, maybe not. But you still got to watch it. I mean, sometimes you see that late northward shift, so we can't totally drop the ball on this one yet.
You got Bay effect as well up that area. So there are a lot of little moving parts all up and down for the different areas of the Southeast region all the way to the Mid-Atlantic. But Jason, it's been a pleasure having you on. We really appreciate your work. A lot of fans here, what you do.
Thank you, guys.
Game.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, Jason, thanks so much. And
all right, good luck. Good luck, you guys.
Thank you. We're happy to start off 2017 with you, having you on. So maybe, like we talked about, we can get you back on sometime later on this year.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jason. All right, guys, and we're going to go ahead, if you're watching, we're going to go ahead and wrap this show up. We're going to be starting our new link here in about a couple of minutes. Join us for the snow discussion. I know a lot of people have been asking about that, so we'll get that started tonight. We have Brad Panovich, Dave Williams from Charleston, Jason Boyer from Asheville, Gary Stevenson from Raleigh, and Jim Gandy from Columbia is going to be joining us. Also have Ricky, who's going to be talking about East Tennessee. We have David, who's up in the Charlottesville area. Maybe Tim Buckley in the Greensboro area as well. So it's going to be a action-packed show, and it's going to be quickly flowing because some of our guests have 10 o'clock newscasts to get to. So make sure that you stay watching us. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to tweet them. We'll be monitoring Twitter as well. So thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week.